What's going on, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to another episode of California Underground. I have with me again Cynthia, who was nice enough to come on again. It's nice to be back doing a live podcast again. How are you doing tonight, Cynthia?
I'm great, Phil. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, so tonight's episode, I found an interview on the Epic Times, and the title of it, Why Was There a Mass Exodus, or Why Is There a Mass Exodus from California? And I thought it was a pretty interesting interview, and I wanted to hold on to it because he had this guy, I think it's Professor Joel Kotkin. He had some interesting views on why. I mean, I agree with some of it, but we're going to go through it little by little and discuss it. And I guess we can just hop right into it. And you've watched the video already. Do you have any preliminary thoughts about the interview?
I think he's very well knowledgeable on, one, in my personal opinion, one key reason. I have like five bullet points on, reasons why people are leaving California. He's very knowledgeable on one of them. So we'll watch the video and I think people will guess which one of those that is. But, same thing. My kind of baseline is the only person I agree with 100% is myself. But he did bring up some good points that I agree with. And, I think that's important to shed light to.
Yeah. All right. So let's hop into it right now. And we'll just pause along the way as we get comments or ideas or stuff we want to chat about.
Joel, I'm very excited to talk to you about California and all these policies that are going on. You're an urban policies expert, and I want to learn from you. What's happening right now in California?
Well, in California, we really have this sort of enormous and growing division between a fairly large, very affluent population, mostly older and mostly white and Asian, and another population that's much larger, poorer, heavily Hispanic, African American, and more young and more.
So I'm just going to stop it right there. I'll agree with him on the first point. California is one of the worst when it comes to income inequality. I think we're somewhere around, like, if we were our own country, we're somewhere around like Guatemala. Like, that's how bad income inequality is in California. So I would agree with him there right off the bat. And I mean, I don't know if the race thing is true or not, but he seems to be a professor, so I'll trust it.
Yeah, so I know California is like the fifth largest economy too. So I think whatever kind of income inequality there is, that just kind of puts that issue on the microscope for the state of California. I know the Hispanics, it's at least 51%. I don't know, the African American percentage or demographic, at the top of my head, but we do have a lot of like those, like South Central LA and a lot of those like urban areas that, have the most income inequality as well, that people are most familiar with. So whatever kind of, big issues, one of them, being the housing issue and like the high cost of living, which is what, he's going to be going more in detail about. I do agree, like those demographics are impacted the most.
Yeah, it's always interesting, especially in a place like San Diego, where you have a lot of affluence in San Diego. I mean, you have big neighborhoods like La Jolla and North County, and then like you could be walking down the street and just see like the complete difference of, homeless on the streets. Or you can just drive down to a different neighborhood in San Diego and go from, Mitt Romney's mansion to, Barrio Logan in 20 minutes on the 5, and it's like a whole different world. So that is pretty interesting. I think he nails it on the head right there. So we'll keep going.
Or young. And this division is just taking the state further and further away from the ideal of the California dream, which is, here's a place you could go and you could reinvent yourself no matter what your background, and you could eventually own a house, raise a family. That whole ideal of California, which was so persuasive in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and really well into the 70s, has almost completely disappeared.
So I'm not native born California. Are you native born California?
I am.
So as someone who grew up on the East Coast, there was always this mythical feeling about California. It was always that go west young man. It was always this idealized version of California we all had in our mind, that it was beautiful. It was the land of like opportunity. You went out there, like people went out to California to like follow their dreams, to strike it rich. It had that, and I think maybe that has that ingrained feeling from the gold rush days, where people would travel west to California because they're like, I'm going to go strike gold and make it rich in California. And that kind of, I feel like that kind of was around for a long time up until recently. But I don't think that's there anymore. I don't think people willingly get up and go, I'm going to go to California because that's where I know I can strike it rich and make it.
I agree with you 100%. For me personally, like, you know, that issue of, you know, the California dream, it was something that I had to like come to grips with as well. You know, I was listening to like an interview when someone was discussing about, you know, California has a great mixture. It has like a lot of urban areas, but, you know, I also argue it's beautiful because, you know, you could travel a few hours and you can be in like the snow, or you could be in the desert, or you could be, you know, by the coast and by the beach. So I think California is a beautiful state because it has like literally everything that you know, has to offer, you know, for anyone that wants to live in a particular area. And so when I was watching this interview, you know, someone was pointing out how it's very interesting, like even people that are like international, or, like out of state, like how they view like those big, more infamous states like New York and California, like how people think like those are like the places to be, even though they have like the most egregious and, you know, very limiting policies, you know, and by that definition, you know, it's impacting the cost of living and the state of living, you know, the most negatively. And there's a lot of, you know, theories about that, you know, like it's cultural, maybe at some point, you know, that used to be true and now it's not. And so like for me, like the paradigm shift I had last year when I, you know, really studied this and came to grips with it was, you know, I had like that natural conservative mindset of like, you know, no matter what happens or no matter what, like, don't be a victim, and you have, you know, that ability to own your destiny and, you know, pave your path. And I still, you know, hold that mindset as well. I don't believe, you know, in self-limiting prophecies and things of that nature. But a paradigm shift I had was, you know, when you look at politics, it impacts that. And now I'm a little bit more, you know, empathetic to those kinds of factors because it does impact, you know, the way that you look at the world and the way, and even like your day-to-day living as well. So I think that's a point, you know, for people to, you know, kind of keep in mind.
And what is this division? Can you explain what does the division look like?
The division is partially that it's economic in the sense that we've managed to chase out many of the middle-class industries. We see many companies, let's say like McKesson, Schwab, Mitsubishi, Toyota, Nissan, companies that employed lots of people at fairly high wage jobs, they've disappeared. And manufacturers have left. They had good jobs. Construction has not come back significantly from where it was historically. So what we've been doing is...
Arthur, please stop it.
Yeah.
So on that point, you know, as far as, you know, because we have like the supply chain crisis going on, AB 5 is a really infamous law that was, you know, authored by Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher. She's one of the California legislators and assemblywomen, and she's actually here based in San Diego. So I agree with that point. You know, anything that has to do with like, you know, freelancers and manufacturers and like truckers like that, you know, law got passed, I believe, in like in 2019, 2020, and it's still like a big point of contention amongst that community as well. And we're facing that. And now it's also impacting, you know, national wide as well because of like all that stuff happening from California.
Yeah, I mean, he talks a lot about the economy, and I mean, that's obviously a big driver of it. The one thing I always think about California is that California has a good economy despite what it does. And I think right now Democrats like to take credit for, oh, we have this incredible economy. We you know, our GDP is, I don't know what the GDP is right now. It's probably close to $1 trillion or something like that, or not trillion. It's probably close to a couple $100 billion, but it's, what I'm trying to say is it thrives because of where it is and how nice California is. If you took California's policies and put them in a place like North Dakota, it would North Dakota would be dead. It'd be a wasteland. It'd be like no one would want to go there. No one would set up business. I think it's despite these things, and it's almost like California itself is holding itself back from how good it could be. And it like you said, AB5 is like a perfect example of why are you being so anti-economic freedom? Why are you not letting people make their own choices, do what they want to do, build their own careers, do that side hustle so they can maybe set up shop or do their own thing? That's just stuff like that. And then they pat themselves on the back and they're like, oh, we're doing such a good job because look at the economy in California. But is it because of the stuff you're doing, or is it because California is just so nice that people want to be here, people set up shop here, there's a lot of money here? So
I agree. I think that's a good point that you made too. And I've never heard that perspective. And you're right. I think part of it, why California can sweep these things under the rug, and I'm glad, at least these kinds of things are coming to the surface because we can't avoid them any longer, or at least the politicians can't hide them any longer, is because, in my opinion, I think it's because of how big the state is. So, I think it's easy for things to get just swept under the rug for it.
yeah.
Now, the middle class job. So in the last 10 years, 80% of all the jobs created in California paid under the median income. And of those, half paid under $40,000 a year. It is not possible in most of California to live decently on $40,000 a year.
The class that you mentioned that are doing okay, what is that class?
Well, I think there is at the very top are what I would call the oligarchs. In the book that's coming out about feudalism, I talk about them as being really right now sort of the global elite, and California, particularly the Bay Area, is the center of that. And then there's a also significant class of people who bought their homes early, got in when the getting was good. People like me. I bought my first house for $150,000 in Hollywood in 1980, and I've been able to ride that roller coaster and enjoy this tremendous prosperity that California had.
Now, of course, under what Janet Yellen's unrealized gains idea, he's probably facing an enormous tax bill for that $150,000 house in Hollywood. I thought it was interesting he mentioned feudalism, because I always thought I was just like a conspiracy theorist about how I feel like society is regressing backwards when it comes to the way society is structured. It feels like we're going back to a feudalist society where it's like you have your upper class, which rules everything. They control everything. They own all the property in the business. And then you just have all of us who are just the serfs who really were debt slaves. We have no opportunity for moving up or down. And that was sort of the revolutionary idea back around the French Revolution, American Revolution, was this idea of like upward mobility. Like that wasn't a thing back then, that you could go from being in the gutter to one day being rich and prosperous. And I feel like we're going backwards. Like now it's the rich are rich and they'll keep getting richer, and the middle class and poor are getting poorer and weaker here in California.
No, I agree. I think it's there's this really great movie. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Parasite. It's this Korean, thriller. It's a bit much because it is in a different setting. It's in a foreign country, and like their politics are very, very different. But the concept and the idea that they propagate, is chilling, because it's reminiscent, of that philosophy you shared, which is like the rich stay rich, and it seems like they're getting richer. Like, for example, like, the most infamous politicians like Obama, Pelosi, like Bernie Sanders, like all these big names that, people don't know politics. They know who these people are. They're getting richer, and I have no idea how and why. And then you look at, speaking for myself, like, or even just like anyone else in general, it's like, I can understand like that feeling that people have, wondering like, I keep climbing this ceiling and I don't feel like, I'm getting anywhere. So that idea of like, having those elitists and, kind of how they pull the strings, and then, regular constituents like us, we're kind of at the mercy of all that. And it seems like, that kind of law where it changes our day to day. It seems like it's always shifting like every single minute. And, how there's so many issues of chilling speeches and, things of how we can make a difference. It can get discouraging at times. So I think he hits the nail on the head as far as, that concept of, fusionism. Another point that, I wanted to point out is, about that housing situation, like being able to buy a home. Assemblyman Kevin Kiley, he, kind of always hits the nail on the head for this, how there's different studies where, people in our demographic, like millennials, there's different studies where, people in our age group and even younger, they look at their parents, and basically that age group feels like, they're not as better off, in contrast to their parents. And I think one of those things is because, of that ability to mobilize and move in different seasons of life. One being where buying a home is like, that's like a huge milestone. It's like, you get married, you have your own family, you start a legacy. And then, being able to buy a home, that's like one of those like big milestones that people can have. And it's very important and it's personal. So I think, the idea of like the economy and being able to potentially get hindered on hitting one of those milestones is important to have.
Yeah, it's almost backwards now because people like this guy who, he appears old enough, maybe he is a grandfather. He's probably better off than like his grandkids because he bought a house at 150,000. He's realized his investment or his gains on that house. But his kids could never buy that house, probably in the position they are in, unless they're all like Silicon tech people. But his kids or his grandkids are probably not in the position better than this guy right now. So it's interesting that again, we're going backwards where the generations are not progressing, they're regressing back to where everyone's just renting and living in these apartments in high density areas. So it doesn't really feel like people own property in California anymore.
I agree. Even, when it comes to that issue of like the income, he was sharing in, this interview, like if you make $40,000, which is like, kind of a give or take, maybe like the average entry level job, depending on what your degree is or what you choose to do. Like, that's kind of like a basic, income, now I can't imagine like living off of that, like right after you graduate school, after working so hard. And even in like those high density urban areas, like the Bay Area, like, yeah, you can make a lot of money, but that housing, that's basically taking up all your salary. And like, imagine taking into account like the commuting and the gas and things of that nature too.
Yeah.
So that really is the real sort of the top tier. Then you got this other tier, and then you've got a significant number of people, particularly public employees, who have big pensions, can retire at 55, 60, can spend the next 20 or 30 years living better than people who made much more money before because they have very comfortable pensions. And in many cases, they sell their homes, move to North Carolina where their pensions make them almost rich. So those have been really the beneficiaries. The system would not work if there weren't enough people benefiting from
it. That's like the elephant in the room when it comes to California. No one ever seems to be talking about that we're $1 trillion in pension debts. The California just has no idea how they're going to pay. But you have, because the government gets bloated and they keep expanding it, making bigger, you have more and more people who are signing up to be government employees, and they're all sitting there with their hands out going, well, I was a good government employee. I worked for the state for how many years? Now where's my pension? So I think that's going to be a ticking time bomb that nobody in California really ever talks about. And I know the Democrats certainly don't want to talk about it. Maybe they hope there'll be a Republican governor or something the day it all kind of comes crashing down and they can blame it on Republicans. But yeah, and there's a lot of state employees who also live pretty high on the hog, just based off taxpayers and the enormous bureaucracy of our state.
Yeah, and even just like, regular day-to-day discussion, like, typically people have like a regular like full-time, they're regular employees, not discussing like business owners or freelancers or things of that nature. There's always, if you're fortunate, if you're blessed, you have like, the health care, you have the dental care, and then you have like the vision care, and then you have like those retirement benefits. Like there's not a lot of like discussion in regards to like, the pension, at least, in my day-to-day, because that's always kind of like an old school kind of talk that, people have. It's like, an unspoken thing, but it's also kind of like, one of those things where it's really out of the reach or just not even the discussion because, people like aren't probably getting it, which is pretty sad.
And it could also be a result of like this guy saying a lot of the middle class manufacturing jobs that used to be here are now gone. So the best middle class job that you could get used to be you could go work at a manufacturing plant. Maybe you were part of a union, there was a pension, but that was still a private company and it was still a private manufacturing company. But now it's people are looking for that style of job. And the only people who are really providing it is the government at this point because businesses are leaving at such a high rate. There are no good middle class jobs with possibility for retirement and benefits like that anymore.
Agreed.
And what percentage do you see are those people? Would there be an estimate?
The best estimate I could see is about 30%, maybe 25 to 30%. This top group, of course, is very small, and it's also divided by age. If you came to California, I came in 71. Or if you were born here and you're over 50, your chances of being prosperous are infinitely better. So that home ownership, for instance, for millennials in California is much below the national average.
Why is that?
Well, the major problem is the costs. The costs of housing in California are extraordinarily high. We're talking about a median multiple, which is a relationship between house price and median income, of something around 8, 9. Historically, it was 3. In Dallas, it's a little over 3. In Houston, it's a little over 3. In Indianapolis, it's even under 3. So basically, at the same income, you basically pay about 3 times as much for a house in California. Now, why did that happen? It starts off with a lot of regulatory issues. Very hard to get approvals. If you're doing a development, and it's going to take you 20 years to get through the process, well, that raises your costs. Then you have all the environmental regulations. You have CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, where you could literally be sued by people who don't even, in some cases, even have to give their name over any objection.
So again, that goes back to this idea that California does well despite all of its regulations and bureaucracy. Like there's obviously a demand for these houses to be this expensive. Otherwise, they wouldn't be that expensive and people wouldn't be buying them. If they were selling these houses here in San Diego for a range of $700,000 to $900,000 and no one was buying them, well, then obviously the prices would come down. That's just basic economics. But the fact that the people who can really afford those are the uber wealthy, then trickles into the income inequality. But it's still, the economy is not doing good or well because of what Democrats put forward and all these regulations. It's doing well because there's people who want to buy those houses. They want to buy the $1 million house in La Jolla. They don't mind spending $1 million to live here in Pacific Beach. Even though it's not the greatest area in the world, they'll still spend $1 million to live in Pacific Beach because they're a couple blocks from the ocean. But it's just, it seems like California could be doing a lot better if they got rid of all this stuff, made it more affordable, more like open to the middle class. But it's still trudging along despite all of these regulations and how bad it is.
Agreed.
So the system makes it very, very difficult to build housing. And the great irony is progressives who created the system have created a system where only basically high-end housing can be built. Expensive apartments, and of course, very expensive homes. I mean, if you go, let's say, to Yorba Linda, you go to some of the other communities in California, you'll see they're building $1 million houses, $1.5 million houses, even in places like the San Joaquin Valley and Inland Empire. You really can't build a house profitably for less than $500,000 or $600,000. Well, that excludes the vast majority of people who could, who could afford it, and that certainly those who work in the Inland Empire have little chance.
Now, we mentioned the housing. How about the jobs?
Well, what we've been doing is we used to have here in California, I'm old enough to remember, we had an incredibly diversified economy, strong agriculture, big construction, manufacturing of all kinds, huge aerospace industry, and then, of course, entertainment and technology. So we had a lot of vibrant and relatively high-paying jobs being produced. Now, our economy, entertainment's kind of flat. Tech has grown, but that seems to be beginning to slow down a bit. But aerospace has declined precipitously. Some of it, the space industry is doing a little bit better than the aircraft. You have lots of manufacturing companies that have left, and you've lost a lot of professional business service jobs, which is the largest group of high wage jobs. And that's when a McKesson leaves San Francisco and it takes really good jobs.
We're still seeing that now with Tesla's gone, Oracle is gone. Just a lot of these companies are not here anymore. Aerospace is gone. I mean, yeah, the military is still here in San Diego and a lot of parts of California. San Diego still thrives on the fact that there is a huge military presence. But again, that's federal money, that's government money. That's not private enterprise like it was before. And those jobs just, they're not here anymore. And if California just basically threw off its shackles and allowed agriculture to thrive, if it allowed aerospace to thrive, if it allowed all these different nuclear energy to thrive, I mean, how much better of a place would California be in right now if they were allowed to just let those things thrive?
I agree. And to your point also, this isn't necessarily like a small family business, it's a franchise, but I was reading this article that the normally private owner of In-N-Out, she had a meeting with Ron DeSantis from Florida. So, there's no confirmed news at all, but, there was a discussion of maybe moving like headquarters to Florida in that meeting. But, basically I can anticipate, more and more of those businesses are at least being open-minded to exploring options outside of state, even like, in political circles, the Daily Wire, like they were a household name here in California, and then they moved their headquarters to Nashville, Tennessee. And, so I can only imagine like, these kinds of things and big moves. Like I wouldn't be shocked if we heard, some other big household names, moving out as well.
In-N-Out was a shocker. That was one that I was like, man, if California loses In-N-Out, I mean, how bad could it get when you lose In-N-Out, which is a California staple? People come to California to have, and they first thing they want to do is have an In-N-Out burger. And if it's gone, it moves to Florida. You're like, okay, how bad is it? Maybe people will start to wake up when they lose In-N-Out. I don't know. Like,
I know.
Is that what it's going to take? Is like, maybe if we just take people's burgers away, if we take their animal style away, people will finally wake up. Like, this is how bad it is. And he brought up entertainment, and I was like, yeah, I mean, every movie I see now has at the end of the credits, because everybody's got to wait through the credits now. There's always a post-credit scene for something. And it always has filmed in Georgia. All of Hollywood has basically moved to Georgia because it was more business friendly. There's not much really filmed in Burbank or Los Angeles anymore. Maybe some sitcoms and stuff like that. But even then, like, there's a lot of entertainment that was a big draw in California is gone as well. So.
And, to kind of shift points as well, you kind of talked about how the rural, like the agricultural community and like the farmers, and how, if only California, had policies that impacted them positively more, we'd be in a better state as well. And it is unfortunate that, those farmers always seem to get the short end of the stick when it comes to policy, because I think similar to like maybe we need to loosen it out for people to wake up.
Yeah.
What if we need those food shortages, to start appreciating our farmers? Because we don't, as consumers, realize short term, like, hey, like, if we don't help the farmers as far as policies are concerned, we might not realize it. But our farmers are the reasons why we have milk in the grocery stores and all of our food. So,
Yeah.
I don't know what we'll need, for people to kind of wake up.
Yeah, it's like nobody realizes how much they need toilet paper until there's a run on toilet paper and no one can find toilet paper anywhere. There's another point I was going to make. Oh, I don't know if you've had a chance to watch Jorge Ventura's new documentary.
I did.
About, well, he brought up there someone, or at least someone in the documentary brought up how they can't grow anything in the Antelope Valley because they're siphoning so much water to these illegal marijuana grows, which, I mean, that's a whole nother thing. And I hope he comes on. I can chat with him about it. But the way they were like, oh, we can't grow our peach trees. We had all this stuff that we used to grow in Antelope Valley. And it's like, now it's just a desert. And it's like they used to grow stuff in Antelope Valley, but now they can't grow anything in Antelope Valley. And that's just stuff that like California, despite itself, somehow screws that up. Like there's a whole opportunity there. And they're like, nah, we're going to screw this up as well. And there's this whole plot of land that we could grow more stuff, but we don't want to grow more stuff because we're rationing water or whatever. But I thought that was pretty interesting. I was like, oh, wow, I thought it was just the San Joaquin Valley, but there's other areas where they can grow stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you make, let's say, $150,000 as a household in Dallas, you get a beautiful house, you can live in a good school district, and of course, you're not paying state income tax. If you're in California with the same income, housing, you probably can't afford a decent housing. You certainly can't afford decent housing in a good neighborhood with decent schools. So the odds are harder. So California, which I think is in many ways the most ideal place to live in many ways, is becoming increasingly difficult, particularly for the poor, particularly for the middle class, particularly for families, and most particularly for people under the age of 40.
So I'm gonna make this point. I know you have some expertise in this. He brings up how people who make 150,000 as a household can't live in good school districts. Do you think that will give rise, and I'm sure you know where this is going, to more parents looking at school choice like private schools, like a religious school or a Catholic school, because they've just been so priced out of all the good districts where they could live and bring their kids to a good public school? They're like, well, I want to put my kids in a good school, but I can't afford to live in this area. So what's my only choice is to figure out, can I send them to a private school? Will that be like a silver lining, is that parents may say like, maybe I want to have maybe more independence for school choice?
Absolutely. On that topic as well, has always been some kind of like some brewing desire to have those options available in California, whether that's an education savings account, where that philosophy of funding students instead of systems, and having that money follow the child instead of it going into like, the institution and the government schools itself. That's always been kind of like a brewing desire for Californians, and that demand has been growing intensively, in the African American community and the Latino community in California, like more than 50%, have wanted that. I think that desire of having vouchers where, if that school district in your community is not performing up to par, and as a parent, you want what's best for your child, and you understand that, education is the forefront, if just by definition, if your child can get the best that they possibly can, the parent will do anything in their power, and even will go beyond their own power, to make that happen. I think parents are willing to do that, even if that means like commuting, 30 minutes or an hour, if that means putting their child in a better school. I think parents should have that opportunity. And I think even like they do anything for it, like bar none.
And hopefully we see, if this proposition passes next year, hopefully we see maybe more schools popping up in areas where it gives people that choice so that they don't have to go to the public school. But yeah, I just thought that was interesting that you said, well, you can't afford in Dallas, you could afford to send your kids if you made 150,000 a household to the best school district. In California, it's 150,000. It's probably going to be like just an okay school district. So that may change people's perception about school choice coming up next year.
And I'll just make one more point before we move on, on that discussion of government schools, because I know it's probably like the number one, counter argument. So while I have the opportunity, I'll just kind of share that. It does require a paradigm shift, when it comes to the issue of school choice, because a lot of people think, it's attacking teachers or things of that nature. It's not, the philosophy of funding students and systems, like it requires a paradigm shift. The best way I could describe it is, that money really should be in the hands of the parents and be funding the student and not the system. My philosophy is we really should be putting our families over any kind of institution out there. So family over institutions, and that money doesn't belong to the government schools. And, the best, analogy that I could give, that Corey DeAngelis, which is, really big thought leader in the school choice community and movement. The best analogy that I could give is giving people the opportunity and the choice to pick which Walmart to go to and which grocery store to go to is not stealing, from that money. Basically, having those options and giving people the opportunity to choose what they do with that money is not stealing from that institution. So, that's the best, analogy that, I could give for school choice, because that discussion of, the school districts and kind of like that distribution, school choice, is a positive thing. And, we should be putting, our families over institutions.
Yeah, agreed.
And how did we end up here?
Well, I think part of it is that there are different things that were going on. One, the tech firms all decided to concentrate in one place instead of spreading jobs out, which is what they had done before in the history of Silicon Valley. It was expanding. Now they've concentrated, particularly in San Francisco, which is kind of a, sort of a hipster dystopia. But so you had that. You had a state government that did not really care about middle class jobs leaving, so that created a lot of this. And I think you have a regulatory environment that chases people and companies away, so people don't come in and invest. I think California got the 7th most investment of any state in the last couple of years, and it's the largest state by far. You would think that it would be incredibly tempting. It's only people with surplus money who are throwing money into California now, and that's mostly Chinese. And of course, that's now slowing down as well, which is going to cause a very interesting situation. Friends of mine who work in real estate say that 70-80% of the new houses in parts of Irvine and Tustin are going to overseas Chinese.
So I had a guest on months back, Jason, who was an expert on Chinese politics, and we had discussed this exact thing. And he was talking about how the state government kind of allowed the Chinese to come in and invest a lot of money. And one of the sort of physical visualization or physical materializations that you can see is if you look at downtown LA right now, they're building all these beautiful skyscrapers and these high apartments and stuff like that. But no one in LA can really afford to live there, and there's not that many people. So, but it's just them dumping money into the economy and buying up land and paying 20, 30, 40% above market value. And he had also brought up how the state government really hadn't cared about middle-class jobs leaving. And the state government could have been a little bit tighter on that sort of stuff and more protectionist. I don't think they wanted to. Maybe because a lot of politicians in Sacramento are benefiting from that. Maybe they have lobbyists who are pushing for this. But that's going to be an issue coming up soon too, is that there's going to be these ghost towns of Chinese investment that we didn't foresee or we just let happen. And no one's going to be living there. It's just going to be big, empty, beautiful apartment buildings.
No, definitely.
Now the problem is these overseas Chinese can't even come visit their properties right now. So I mean, they're we've got a terribly imbalanced economy, and then you have such things as poor schools, which means middle class people feel they have to send their kids to private school. Obviously, the high housing prices, high taxes. So what we're seeing is a growing migration out of California. And what's really interesting and has not been really reported is foreign immigration has slowed down. Actually, LA County is now getting fewer immigrants than it did before.
I see.
Because you know what? Immigrants aren't stupid. I mean, they know that unless they have a lot of money, California is a very difficult place to live.
Now, going back to this division between these two groups, you mentioned there is the elite group and the people that are doing fine. There's about 25-30% guesstimated. And the other 70%, why do you think the majority are supporting this ideology if they're hurting them?
It's a very good question. I think there are several things. One, the Republican Party in California is a joke. It has perhaps permanent brain damage. I'm not.
I mean, anyone who tunes into the show knows I spend a lot of time harping on how bad the California Republican Party is. But he's right. I mean, it's just that there's no legitimate opposition party in California. And that's one big issue, is that there's nobody holding Democrats' feet to the fire in California. And, if I see one more tweet from Jessica Malone Patterson complaining and not offering solutions, I don't know. I'm going to send like a nasty letter or something. I don't know what else I could do, but threaten not to give her money. But it's just like, it gets so frustrating that you don't have an opposition party here in California.
Yeah. And, to kind of, go a little bit backward, because he talked about, immigration, being in California, we are a southern border state, meaning, we, in San Diego in particular, we live like, we're right by Mexico, Tijuana. So that, discussion of like, the immigration going on in their southern border is always kind of a point of discussion. To be honest, I don't know too much about, what's going on in our California border. I know that it can be better though. Like I know the walls aren't, the greatest. But that's been, as far as where the are coming in. And I would say actually more illegal aliens. But they're coming from Texas. And, one of my organizations, Latinos for America First, where I'm a volunteer for, Jorge Ventura, who you mentioned, who came out with a new documentary about the cartels here in California. And then, Anthony Cabasa from El American. And then, one of our volunteers, Anthony Aguero for Latinos for America First. They do a lot of investigative reporting at the southern borders in Texas. And you have to wonder, like, okay, there's this, obviously Texas has their own set of politics that I don't want to get into on why they're going there and not here in California. But you kind of have to ask yourself, like, why would they go there and not here in California when we're technically a southern border state too?
Yeah, it's and talking about being on the southern border, we go down to TJ every once in a while because my wife grew up down there and she has family, so we go down and visit. And there's good restaurants down TJ, and it's a lot more affordable to go to a really nice restaurant in TJ than it is here in San Diego. And I'd be interested to see, because there's so much growth in TJ of nice apartment buildings, which are completely catered towards those who work in San Diego but want to live in TJ, where they can afford a condo for $300,000. And it's like they're living at the Ritz-Carlton, but you're living in TJ. However, it doesn't change the fact that you can afford a lot more in TJ. It'd be interesting to see what kind of migration is happening from like San Diego County into TJ, which I know is now a problem for TJ, because I was talking to our cousin down there, and he was saying how now Americans who are living in TJ are pricing out people living in TJ because they're paying way too much for property down there, which is driving up all the property prices in TJ. So California is now spilling over its problems into TJ because it's making property too expensive down there. Maybe not to Americans, but people who live in TJ, it's too expensive.
Yeah, and to your point as well, I was born and raised here in San Diego. I went to Chula Vista High School, which is a school where Mario Lopez went to. So that's always like my bragging point there. But, that being said, Chula Vista High School was primarily Hispanic. And I had a lot of classmates growing up who, lived in TJ, and they commuted every single day, to school every day. And it always would boggle my mind, like, oh my gosh, why would you do that? And then the biggest thing they would tell me is just because of like the housing, it's expensive and whatnot. So they're willing to make those choices to do that, for an education. But you do have to ask yourself, like, why can't they just live here? And and to the point, it's because of California politics. To kind of shift gears to talk about the Republican Party, I laughed pretty hard when I heard that. But, if anyone follows me on my social media, my name's Cynthia Kaui. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter. So Twitter is where I'm the most political, and that's where I kind of let my wings fly. But I've tweeted out a few times kind of harping on this point where, as far as like with the GOP and what we can do to improve our platform in the Republican Party, I've always used to, when it came to like the messaging or like kind of like how to make us better, was always like that, what you discussed, always being on offense instead of defense. And so I have significantly spent now less and maybe like 0%, attacking like Democrats or even those people and really trying to hone, our own side and our own party and being constructive about it because, a lot of it can be, a little bit unproductive. And, because I'm 100% convinced that I feel like Republicans, we, destroy our own side more than the Democrats actually destroy us at times. But, I'm kind of also at that point where I don't want to jade myself too much to the point to where like, regardless of, to the point to where we're at, it's unfortunate that we had to hit this bottom and we're at this point because we didn't have the opposition party. But I am optimistic and hopeful that like, hey, maybe we can change. I'm willing to forgive and forget. Why are we at this point now? But are we willing to own up to where we are right now and, shift gears now? Because at this point, like, if we lose in and out or some other places, I don't know what's going to take for the GOP and, the Republicans to get their act together so we can be on offense.
Well, I'm sure Jessica Milan Patterson has a clever tweet if we lose in and out already prepared for us, not offering solutions, just complaining about why she can't get her in and out anymore or something like that. But we could do a whole different show about what's wrong with the California GOP. I could probably do several shows. In fact, I do a lot of shows just talking about how bad the California GOP is. And
I'd be happy to come on and have a discussion with you.
I'm sure we could have plenty of discussions about it. Could have a whole roundtable. So,
not sure if they'll ever recover. They still don't get the point that running around defending Donald Trump is not good politics in California. Mm-hmm. They don't understand that the immigrants are the ones who probably should be the most supportive of a more moderate or conservative.
And I just want to stop real quick there. Yes, 100%. I don't think running around defending Donald Trump. Donald Trump is toxic in California. You just need to get off the Donald Trump train here in California. As much as people want to pretend like that we didn't go conservative enough. That was the problem. We all need to embrace Trump more in California, or that Trump really won California in 2020. That's my favorite, is when people are like, Trump probably won California. We just, the fix was in, and cheating and mail-in ballots and all that stuff. So, they need to dump the Trump in here in California, which I know probably angers a lot of people.
And, to your point as well, when it comes to candidates running in California, because we have redistricting going on, whether that's, Assembly or, the U.S. Senate, Congress, U.S. House of Representatives, and California senators as well, or even school boards, focusing on those issues, are what people are looking for. I know that, whatever's happening like at Capitol Hill is a lot, but, unless you're running for, U.S. House of Representatives, it's not very relevant to what your potential constituents are. So it's okay to have those personal positions and, have certain kind of opinions on, cultural and political commentary. But, I highly recommend, as someone who's trying to be a political strategist, for candidates, it's okay to have those opinions about whether you like Trump or not or things of that nature. But, when it comes to your voters, those aren't the questions that they're asking you. At least people that are serious, they're not going to be asking you who you voted for. I think they're more interested in, like, if you're running for state assembly, I think they're curious about how would you vote on certain things and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Kind of politics. And at the same time, within the Democratic Party, and I've been a Democrat most of my life, if you're a moderate pro-business Democrat who wants to see people buy homes and improve their lives, and
like a Kevin Paffrath,
you have people like Tom Steyer who are going to pour millions of dollars to make sure you don't get elected. I mean, so you've got people like, you've got the Greens and the public employees. Those are the people pushing this. Now, ultimately, the public employees will face a crisis when the economy slows because these pensions are not sustainable. But until that happens, they still think somehow we can keep raising taxes, increasing regulations, and there'll still be money around. But actually, as you know, California has about $1 trillion in pension debt. It's not going to last in the long run. And I think that and then the social ramifications we can see. Look what's happening. You go to downtown LA or San Francisco. It's like something out of a dystopia from the dark ages. I mean, it is incredible. I mean, I go to third world countries and I don't see something quite as horrible sometimes as what I see here. There's great poverty, but the insanity, the people who are, clearly, deranged in one way or another. And we allow them to camp out on our streets. I can tell you, whatever we might think about the Chinese regime or the Russian regime, certainly the Chinese regime, they would never allow that to happen.
First off, it looked like he was like choking on a burp that he had to let out there for a minute. But I think this changes if you don't know he's a Democrat until you get about all the way through this video and go, oh, okay, he's a Democrat. But he's a moderate Democrat, I guess, because he's very critical of how California is. I would be interested to see, and that's something maybe the California Republican Party has to start doing, is reaching out to disenfranchised moderate Democrats like this guy, like a lot of Democrats who maybe woke up during COVID about how bad things were. Because he's right, there is no place for a moderate pro-business Democrat anywhere in California Democratic Party. It's all about social issues. It's all about social justice. It's all about the environment and stuff like that. It's not about like business or anything like that.
No, I agree. I think also COVID did wake up a lot of people. I think you got to see even people like on Twitter, I follow a lot of, great parents, a lot of parent unions, a lot of great groups, in regards to education, and anything that has to do with like the medical fight. That was kind of like a turning key for a lot of people. Like there's even parents that were very, on the side of like the status who, obviously were in favor of like the lockdowns or anything of that nature. And then they kind of woke up and, they really, took a 360-degree change on that. And, to your point, as far as like how to reach out to those people as well, because I've done a lot of digging about, ways to empower people to run for office and also educating people on how we can help those people running for office, if they decide not to run, how we can help those people who feel called to do so. And as far as like what I give Democrats a lot of favor is, on the GOP side, I know they're doing great work right now, but for the Democrat side, one of my friends who ran for state assembly a couple of years ago, she sent me, it's called runforsomething.net. And she told me how, she ran as a Republican for state assembly. And she said that the Democrats actually reached out to her to help her. And so I don't know, on the Republican side, if that has been done. And if so, people can let me know so I can, educate myself and correct myself. But if the other side can do it, why don't we do it too? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that, would be open-minded to, running different platforms. So I just thought that I should throw that out there. Because basically our side could do that because the other side did it for our side.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's just, the California GOP and how they get stuck in their ways, and they don't want to expand their mind too much because they're afraid of well, if we try anything different or we try anything new, then we might alienate this 5% of the voter roll that is super conservative, when in reality that 5% is not winning you any elections anytime soon. But they got to try something, because right now whatever they're doing is not working. So I think there's an opportunity with a lot of moderate Democrats, probably independents as well, who are looking for an actual platform. And I say this plenty of times. I say, I always bring up the Republicans because they have the infrastructure, they have the money, they have the connections. But if it were like the Libertarian Party all of a sudden got its act together and became the opposition party, I'd probably be fine with that too. It's just, there's got to be some opposition here in California. And that's really what it comes down to. One party rules. It's clearly not working here in California. And the one question I always tell people to ask is, if Democrats have all the solutions, why is California not an absolute utopia? They have control of everything. So why is California not a utopia? Why have you not achieved all of your democratic ideals? Why is it not everything you've been touting for so long that you think are the solutions to every ill of our society? How come we're not a perfect utopia?
Agreed. And there's a candidate running for, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, basically there's a candidate running for state controller. I think the California recall for Governor Newsom, I think it opened the door for people to start having discussions on, statewide elections, like the Board of, Equalization, the Lieutenant Governor, the Attorney General, and, the Secretary of State, things of that nature, and the Treasurer. And there's this really important statewide position called State Controller, and Lanny Chan, who did a really great fundraising quarter. I think so far he launched his campaign, sometime this year, and he's already fundraised more than $1 million, which is really impressive, especially for someone running for, a position that, a lot of people don't know of. I would argue even people that are political geeks might not even know what a state controller does. But, he did a podcast kind of sharing more about, the one party rule, and he drives that point, which affirms your opinion as well, which is the Democrats have had decades long power all this time, and you have to ask yourself why is that? And in addition to that, if we're doing so great, why is that? The Democrats don't have an excuse or justification.
Yeah. I mean, they can't legitimately blame anything on Republicans, because Republicans are such a small minority of both chambers of the legislature. They haven't held the governor's mansion in how many years? So they can't be like, oh, it's those darn Republicans screwing it up. Republicans don't have power over anything. So the only people who have power over stuff is you. And we're certainly not a utopia. So, you should be able to ramrod everything through that you want. But I don't know. We got a couple minutes left. I don't want to take up too much of your time. And then we'll wrap this up before. No, we got a couple more minutes, so we'll wrap it up soon.
I've been to where poor people live in China. They live way out of town. I'm not suggesting that that's what we want to see, but we have to be very clear that a society cannot allow this kind of behavior. And what's weird is the state wants everybody to go and work in the central core, but the central core is basically become dystopic. And so certainly nobody with a family is going to want to live in San Francisco unless they're so rich that they can get their way out of it. There are more dogs than kids in San Francisco. There are more drug addicts than there are high school students. This is the role model for the rest of the country? I don't think so.
What do you recommend for our audience to do?
Well, I think what we need in California, and this is not partisan, we need to become more critical of the current regime. Whether you're a Democrat, support the Democrats who are pragmatic and pro-business and middle-class oriented. Try to get the Republican Party to get its act together, which of course may be asking too much, but to get the Republicans to say, stop worrying about these social issues and all this bravado and focus on the economic issues, because there are many Latinos, African Americans, and obviously Asians and whites, all middle-class people who can be reached on the basis of this isn't working. When I talked to my class, 36 kids, and I asked them, how many are you going to stay in California? 4. That never would have happened 20 years ago. Why would anyone want to leave California? With great weather, beautiful topography, all sorts of culture, great food, all this stuff that is really unique to California. It takes policy genius of some diabolical sort to push people out of California.
Well, with that, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, he hammers it home again about the Republicans, the social issues and the bravado and the economic, and he was going to say something, but I completely forgot. So if you have anything to say, hop in, because I was just going to say something I completely forgot now. I'm trying to remember.
Sure. So when it comes to like the social issues, when I think what the professor was saying, and what we're talking about when we say social issues, like things with religion, the pro-life issue, like anything that's extremely controversial, like when it comes to that, the LGBT issues, like that's what we mean. I just want to clarify for the viewers and the people watching this podcast, that's what we mean when we say social issues. Mm-hmm. And then of course, when it comes to like the contrast, there's other issues people can debate on, which is like the economic side and some other things as well, which I would argue that the Republicans, even if someone isn't apolitical, Republicans have always been the party that are for less regulations for business owners, lower taxes. They're very fiscally conservative, and that when they get kind of any kind of bills or things of that nature, if it's raising money, 99% of the time they're usually voting no for it. So that's what we mean by like social issues. And for people that they hear like, oh, like how can you be a conservative Republican in California and not have that, like I've shared before, like depending on what you choose to run for, if you choose to run for office or things of that nature, or when you're having these discussions with people, maybe on a one-on-one or like in a roundtable or group basis, like it's okay to have those convictions of yours. It's okay to have those opinions. You just kind of need to pick and choose your battles on what you can win or not. Like, for example, let's say I was running for state assembly. Right now in California, for California politics, we do have a Democrat supermajority, meaning that in the legislature, there's 2/3. If you look at these people's voting records on Democrat side, they're not voting for conservative social issues. They're voting no. They're not offering bills or things of that nature. So let's say if you're a Republican running for that, and you are someone that, has conservative social issues, it's okay to say like, I'm a Christian or things of that nature. So if there's any kind of bill that has to do with those issues, you can count on my vote that I'm voting yes for it. However, my platform, that's not a priority. My platform is focused on the economy. My platform is focused on, other things that are important for the district, things of that nature. So if you're a conservative Republican in California, it's okay to have those issues. But I would argue if you're a candidate, or even if you're someone there, depending on your situation. I don't know if you'll change people's minds on that regard, but that's just my observation.
Yeah, the thing I remember I was going to say, because he was talking about society and how it's kind of breaking down, especially in like a lot of these inner cities. I was reading an article today on Breitbart that said the LAPD is now telling citizens to just comply and cooperate with robbers in Los Angeles. Like, if someone's committing a robbery, don't fight back. Just let it happen. Cooperate with them and comply, and then you'll be a good witness when we have to go find them. And I just thought to myself, I was like, this is how bad it's gotten. This is how bad it's gotten in places like LA, that they're just like, yeah, just let just why don't you just work with the criminal? Just let them do what they need to do, and maybe the police will come and like take care of it later. It's like, why aren't we focused on the issue of like, why is this happening? Why is it so bad in California? And they admit in the article, LAPD was, yeah, it's like they admit, like, yeah, we know it's really bad and that there's a lot more robberies and crimes being committed. So just, just work with them, just comply and work with them. And I'm like, yeah, I think that's what this guy's talking about. Is it's just society has gotten bad in California, where shoplifting is out of control. Robberies are obviously out of control. It's just drug use is out of control. And California just takes a soft stance on it. So I don't know if that's like, maybe that's a winning issue for another candidate, to be like, I'm going to be tough on this sort of lawlessness of like, we live in a society and you have to be a part of society, and this is unacceptable what's happening. So our hearts go out to people who are struggling, but we also live in a society where people have to conduct themselves a certain way.
Agreed. And I apologize for, interrupting while you're talking as well, but I was just going to add that San Francisco, I saw the same article, but it was in San Francisco too. Like, if that happens, just comply. But I do think that's an area of opportunity where, hey, maybe if a Republican, maybe you can't be like, so gung-ho about like a social issue campaign, but that's something you'd be extremely like convicted about, like no compromise, no being bipartisan, no meeting in the middle, like, no, like law and order. This is the law. It is what it is, and have a very hard stance about that. So, if you can't be so hardcore about the social issues, I think those kitchen table issues, you can get away with being like, more to the right, or I guess have like that more like hardcore Republican conservative stance, I guess, if we're going to, put in those terms.
Yeah, it could be a way to get that if you're talking about socially conservative kind of stance of like, we can be empathetic and help. It's kind of like a carrot and the stick approach of like, well, we want to help people. We're going to give them plenty of ways to get help and stuff like that. But it doesn't give you the right to rob people or break into cars or all these petty crimes. That's not acceptable. Like, you have one choice or the other. You can get the help that we want to provide you, but if you're going to be lawless in cities and stuff like that, you're still going to pay the consequences for it. So could be a plank for conservatives moving forward in California. All right. So it's been over an hour, a 16-minute video. We had a lot to talk about. So I don't want to take up any more of your time. It's already gone on long enough, but did you have any final thoughts on the interview? And then also, where can people find you if they want to read more of your stuff and your insights?
Thank you. And, I had a great time. It's always, I feel like we can go on about these kinds of things. So thank you again. I think we had a productive conversation regarding the interview. I think, the professor and Epic Times is a great resource. And I thought the interview was a great opportunity to kind of see in the inside of someone who is a Democrat, because it's always like, even like on Twitter, I follow, journalists and reporters who you can kind of tell off of their publications, they lean more to the right, but it is important to kind of see like what the other side, like how they view our side too, because it can, help iron sharpens iron. So, I think that's good. So people can follow me, Cynthia Kaui. So, it's Cynthia, and my last name is Kaui, Kaui. So it's, right there. You can follow me on Instagram. I have a lot of lifestyle content, and I post politics here on there. We have, the primaries coming up in June, and, the midterms coming up next year. And, I'm pretty active in our San Diego Republican Party and looking to get involved more with the California GOP and, helping different candidates. So definitely when election season's coming, you'll see different candidates I support and things of that nature. But if you want to follow me for political commentary, along with different things that, I share that I find important, you can follow me on Twitter, and you can just type in my name, Cynthia Kaui, as well. And, as I mentioned, I'm a volunteer for Latinos for America First. So if you want to look us up, we're going to be endorsing candidates on the federal level. But here in California locally, I'm a volunteer for Californians for School Choice. We have a ballot initiative where we are creating an amendment to the California Constitution. So every child in California can have an education savings account. So basically bring school choice to California. Politicians
I think we broke up a little bit. I think we might have broke up. And you might have lost her. Oh, did we lose you for a little bit?
I think we did. I'm sorry. Do you remember the last thing that I said?
You were talking about educational savings accounts for prop.
Okay, cool. I apologize. That was a little embarrassing. So basically, Californians for School Choice, creating an amendment. We have a ballot initiative to have every child in California have an education savings account. So our website is californiaschoolchoice.org. On Twitter, it's School Choice, and then the number is 22 for School Choice 22. And then on San Diego, we have a county Instagram, and that's School Choice San Diego. But other than that, thank you, Phil. I appreciate you having me on, and I'm happy to come back anytime.
Awesome. Yep. Very busy. So thank you for coming on. And everyone, we'll be keeping on this schedule again soon, Thursdays at 8 p.m. We'll be doing these live podcasts. And as always, Coffee and California Politics every Wednesday at 9 a.m. And have a good night, everyone. We'll see you on the next one. Later.